Breaking news on this Selection Sunday. The results are in. They have decided that the top 4 teams is number 1, Alabama, number 2, Clemson, number 3, Ohio State, and number 4, Notre Dame. This is exactly what our panel of experts have thought was going to happen. And our college football playoff expert, Jerry Palm, had gotten it right. So it's number 1, Alabama facing number 4, Notre Dame, and number 2, Clemson facing number 3, Ohio State. Let's have Jerry Palm join us now. And Jerry, do you think they got it right?
Yeah, in fact, they'd made it, I think, pretty clear all along that those 4 teams had separated themselves from the rest of college football, and because we'd had the same 4 teams every week. So with Notre Dame lost to Clemson, that's just 2 of those 4 teams playing each other. That's not really going to separate the fact that those 4 teams are still separated from the rest of college football. So yeah, Notre Dame had the better schedule and the better win of the teams that were competing for that spot. And I thought it was really kind of obvious it had to be Notre Dame.
All right, thank you so much. We're going to talk to you much more coming up very soon as we take a look at the college football playoff matchups that were just announced. We have number 1, Alabama facing number 4, Notre Dame. That will be in the Sugar Bowl in New Orleans on January 1st. Then number 2, Clemson versus number 3, Ohio State. The Rose Bowl, still called the Rose Bowl at this time, and that's going to be in Arlington, Texas. So our team of experts got it correct. I think that this is what a lot of people thought would happen. There were questions about if Texas A&M would get into that number 4 spot. We want to welcome in our panel, Dennis Dodd, Danny Cannell, and Barrett Salih. We want to go around the horn here. I'm going to start with you, Dennis. Do you think that the College Football Playoff Committee got it right with those top 4?
Yeah, they've got it right. And through the 7 years of the 12-year contract, they've pretty much got it right, because the only controversy in any of this at the end of the day is it a legitimate playoff if Team X is left out? And I've gone by that every year, and you can't say that this year. It's not, it's a legitimate playoff without Texas A&M. It's a legitimate playoff without Cincinnati. The only thing to talk about here is Notre Dame is an at-large, or whatever you want to call them, not winning the ACC. And Ohio State playing, 5 games less than the other teams? That was a decision they had to make. But we've known for weeks this was coming. The Big Ten maneuvered its way so Ohio State could be in this place. So I don't have a problem with it. I wouldn't have had a problem with it, frankly, if Cincinnati had gotten in. Not Texas A&M, but Cincinnati over one of those 2 I just mentioned. Because I keep saying it. They beat 3 ranked teams at the time of kickoff. They played 6 teams that spent at least 2 weeks in the top 25. And this is the best the American Conference has ever been, and I would say by far. And for the first time, Cincinnati, or a group of 5 teams, let's put it that way, was a legitimate discussion point. I'm not saying they were going to get in, but it wasn't just some folly like in Marshall in 1998 going 10-0 or 11-0. There was legitimate discussion about Cincinnati because there deserved to be legitimate discussion about Cincinnati, but they got it right. And along we go.
Yeah, Dennis, I think they got it right too. I will play the devil's advocate for Texas A&M and say, all right, look, who would Alabama like to play more, Texas A&M or Notre Dame? And I think Alabama would like to play Notre Dame more than Texas A&M, because you go back and look at that matchup in week 2. A&M moved the ball all over that Alabama defense. In fact, had the ball inside the 25-yard line 5 times and came up with nothing. So, I think there's that aspect of it to it. And I know A&M fans are going to be mad because they want to see their team in and feel like they deserve to be in. But let's be real about what this is. It's about what teams are the best in college football. And best is subjective based on whoever is making that decision. And part of that is resume. Notre Dame has the best win in college football this year. There is no doubting that. They cannot take that away. They've got the best win in college football over Clemson. They've also got a really solid win over Notre Dame. A&M doesn't have that. In fact, their strongest bullet point is a 3-loss Florida team that they beat, and then maybe what? Auburn? I mean, that just doesn't do anything for me. So yeah, they got it right. I do think that A&M folks have a point that they can make, because let's be real, every single argument outside of Clemson and Alabama, they're flawed. You just have the committee just has to figure out which flaw matters most and which flaw matters least. And right now, A&M's resume is the one that's costing them.
Come on, guys. The committee nailed it. They 100% nailed it. You know why? Because these are the 4 teams that the most people will watch on television. Man, does it feel like that. I hate the way the optics look of this. Yeah, did they get the top 4? Maybe. Barrett, it's subjective. Who the heck knows? Man, you can't tell me that even Oklahoma, who has 2 losses, clearly doesn't deserve it. But you can't tell me Oklahoma couldn't beat Notre Dame or could beat Ohio State. They absolutely could. They might even be able to beat Clemson or Alabama, but we've seen them recently. They've struggled. Cincinnati, you can't tell me they have a worse chance of knocking off Alabama or Clemson than Notre Dame. They've got a pretty dynamic defense. They got some playmakers there too. So this to me is just incredibly frustrating when we try to figure out this beauty pageant and who's going to get the invitations for those Final 4 spots. Yeah, when you look at the criteria, which, by the way, is written such that the committee can, give any reason they want to the Final 4 teams, then, yeah, if you kind of work the criteria in there, yeah, it makes some sort of sense. But there are some really bad optics in this one. And I think for Ohio State to only play 6 games, it's incredibly unfair for everyone in the top 3 that played 11 games. It's an unfair competitive advantage. They'll be fresher. They won't be as banged up. They haven't subjected themselves to the pounding that you usually have to go to in a schedule the way these other teams have. Will it play out? I don't know. But it's just the absurdity of this whole process is on full display this year, as I've kind of pounded the table on that this whole preview show. But did they get it right? Like, it's impossible not to get it right the way it's written. Like, it just can't. That whatever they say is, of course, going to be right.
So, Danny, you say it's impossible to get it right the way it's written. You've clearly said that this process is dumb. You said that they nailed it because this is the 4 teams that people would watch. So what does the committee need to do to actually get this right? Does there need to be a different set of rules? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the simplest, easiest change, Jenny, but I think it requires much more than that, is just require conference champions, the 4 best conference champions. That would eliminate some of the problems. But I really think you need to see expansion where we go to 8 teams, where the best thing they could do is fire the committee, send them home packing, burn the computers to the ground, and let the teams actually play it on the field. Now, there is some disparity there between the Power 5 and Group of 5. I'm well aware of that. If there's a way you could figure it out, great. If not, then let's separate the 2 and let the Group of 5, who has 0 chance. I mean, this was their year, but they have 0 chance of getting into the real college football playoff. Then let them create their own, which would be incredibly compelling if you had BYU playing against Coastal and Cincinnati playing against Liberty. And you had some of these teams in the Group of 5 squaring off for their own championship, as opposed to an invitation to a bowl game that if they win, they're just going to get told, oh, the team you beat didn't even want to be there. So there's we're at a crossroads of college football where we need to do something to clarify and to get out every opinion maker out of it and let the teams actually go win it on the field. Would it make a difference? Probably not. Probably Bama and Clemson would probably still be playing for the national championship. But the regular season would actually improve that much more in November. We'd see more inclusion. We'd see the West Coast back at the table as a Pac-12 champion would have a chance, and it would be better for the sport, where we are losing players because they are opting out, saying, if we don't have a chance for the playoff, we're going to shut down early. Well, give those teams a little bit longer leash so that when it's deeper in the season, they actually do have a chance for the playoff, and we could save some of the issues that are plaguing college football right now.
Now, we got your take on Ohio State, Danny. Now, I want to talk to Dennis and Barrett Sallee about this really quick because, Ohio State only did play 6 games. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on if it's fair for them to be a part of this 4-game playoff, 4-team playoff.
Yeah,
Dennis, we'll start with you.
Oh, go ahead.
Dennis, we can start with you.
Oh, okay. Is it fair? No, it's not fair. But fair went out the window about 3 weeks ago when the Big Ten voted to suspend its whatever it is, its threshold for the conference championship game. And they knew this was going to happen when they tried to play 9 straight weeks in the middle of a pandemic. You knew you were going to lose games. You knew your champion probably wasn't going to play 9 games. And that was the reality of the situation. But they changed in midstream. I think this is a lot different than the ACC. Not scheduling games for Clemson and Notre Dame the week before the championship game. I thought that was brilliant, lining their 2 best teams up for the possibility of getting both in the top 4, and that's exactly what happened. What Ohio State did is go against its own rules. It said there was an integrity to that conference championship game. I wonder what Cincinnati feels about that. Can you imagine if Cincinnati gotten in over Ohio State and all the things Danny was talking about were true? They played more games. They played 3 ranked teams. They played more ranked teams than Ohio State. But Ohio State's got the brand name. They look better at times, but in the only 2 games they were pushed, they were not great. Indiana at home, we know about that. Indiana made the great comeback. Northwestern had them beat for a half, and then Trey Sermon happened. So that was a supreme athlete against an inferior team, whatever. But look, it's going to expand, guys. We know that. It's just a question of timing. It's going to last the 5 years of this contract because, number one, ESPN likes cost certainty. They're paying $7.2 billion for the 12 years of this. In the middle of a pandemic, they're not going to write a new check. Okay, that's one thing. The other thing is, when it does expand, and it will, I'm not disagreeing with anybody. It'll go to 6 or 8 or whatever it is. If you think Alabama and Clemson 5 is too much, or 3 times with Notre Dame and Clemson, get ready for a whole lot more of that. Good or bad. I'm not pronouncing sentence on it, but when you have that many teams playing that many games, there's going to be a lot more rematches.
There are, and look, just say no to playoff expansion. It would make this sport so much worse. Danny mentioned that the West Coast needs to have a representative for winning the Pac-12. How on earth does Oregon deserve to play for a national championship this year? You know as well as I do, the only way these athletic directors and commissioners are going to sign off on expansion is if all the Power 5 conferences agree that their champion gets in. Oregon didn't do anything to deserve a national championship. In fact, I would say that Ohio State didn't. But because you have this 4-team playoff, you've got to fill it with 4 spots. Ohio State is going to be one of those 4 spots. In fact, expansion is not the answer right now. In this specific year, going back to the BCS is a more responsible way to do it because there are only 2 good teams. Everything's going to be subjective in college football. You cannot have a 127-team sport with conferences that are largely based on geography and an academic affiliation from 70 years ago determine who makes a college football playoff and ultimately is eligible for a national championship. That makes 0 sense whatsoever. The goal is to reward the most excellent team in college football. If you expand it and you have automatic bids for conference champions, you put a favor on access over excellence. And when it comes to this year in college football, there are only 2 excellent teams, Alabama and Clemson. So no, the answer to solve this riddle is not playoff expansion. In fact, if you want to do it right, it's contracting back to the BCS because in terms of making the regular season matter, can you imagine what yesterday would have been like if we only had the BCS? It would have been awesome, as would the rest of the regular season. But in the end, we have this mess. So no, expansion is not the answer. Go back to 2. Be a lot easier.
So